My dear chosen one, have you noticed how some people lose their minds the moment you stop asking for permission to be happy? Not because you're doing anything wrong, but because you no longer need their approval to move forward. It's subtle, but it's spiritual. When you stop apologizing for following your truth, especially in love, you shake the very system that once kept you small. And the people who depended on your silence, they feel that shift like a death in the spirit. This is not about your soulmate. It's about the invisible role you just refused to play. And now, the ones who secretly fed off your submission are starving. There's something deeper behind their opinions, something unspoken. What they say about your partner, your relationship, your choices, it's not the real story. The real story is this: the version of you that used to bend, shrink, and explain is gone. And when that version dies, people who were emotionally attached to your obedience start spiraling. You didn't betray them, you stopped betraying yourself. That's what's really killing them. And if you feel this tension rising around you lately, you're not imagining it. Something spiritual is happening, and it's bigger than they'll ever admit. So if this message already stirs something in your soul, write it in the comments. I don't owe to anyone. Because today, we're going to dive deep into this shift. The moment you stop being their emotional puppet and start being spiritually whole. And yes, it's going to cost you some people, but it's going to restore something much greater: your sovereignty. Stay with me until the end. This story is going to reveal things you've always felt, but never had words for. And if you're ready, like this video, subscribe to Being Extraordinary, and let's begin. For a long time, you were the emotional anchor for people who never learned how to stand on their own. You became the one they turned to for stability, for validation, for reassurance. And you thought that was love. You thought that sacrificing your needs, your voice, your joy was the way to earn connection. But in truth, it was spiritual captivity. You were the steady ground they stood on while you quietly sank, and now that you've chosen to build your own foundation, their world feels like it's collapsing. The moment you chose your soulmate, or even just the possibility of love that aligns with your spirit, you triggered something they didn't expect. You broke a silent contract, the kind that says, as long as you don't grow, I feel safe. And now that you're no longer holding back for their comfort, they mask their fear with concern. Suddenly it's, I just don't trust them, or I don't think they're right for you. But if you listen closely, you'll hear what they're really saying. I'm afraid of losing the version of you that I could control. You, see, their opinions were never neutral. They were coded, wrapped in the illusion of care, but rooted in fear. And that fear wasn't about who you chose. It was about what your choice represented: independence, emotional clarity, the refusal to play the role they assigned you. When someone has grown comfortable using your guilt to keep you close, your freedom feels like a personal attack. Not because you're being cruel, but because you're finally being whole. Guilt was their greatest weapon, not through loud accusations, but through subtle energy. The look of disappointment, the silence after you share something joyful, the shift in tone when you speak your truth. You began to notice it, how your happiness created tension, how your peace felt like a threat. And slowly, it became clear. You were being emotionally punished for becoming yourself. And here's where the shift began. The old you would have apologized, would have toned it down, would have tried to make everyone comfortable, even if it cost your soul. But not anymore. Something in you woke up. You stopped explaining. You stopped softening your truth just to maintain a false peace. And that was the beginning of the collapse, not of your life, but of the emotional prison they built around you. They won't admit it, but your silence started to break their system. Your decision to no longer ask, "What will they think?" before choosing love was the spiritual earthquake. It revealed the imbalance. It exposed the manipulation. And even if they never say it, they felt the moment you stopped needing their permission. That moment, that energetic divorce, hit harder than any goodbye ever could. Because in truth, what's dying isn't a relationship. It's the illusion of control, the unspoken belief that you'd always stay within the emotional limits they defined for you. Now that you've stepped out of that frame, they no longer know who you are, and that terrifies them. But what they don't realize is that this version of you, the one who chose alignment over approval, this is who you were always meant to be. People started acting differently, not always with words, sometimes with silence. The kind of silence that doesn't just fill a room, but changes the air inside it. You'd speak, and instead of connection, there was pause. Instead of celebration, hesitation. Conversations became shorter, colder, more mechanical. At first, you questioned yourself. You replayed moments, doubted your tone, tried to interpret the shift. But deep inside, your soul knew. The moment you stopped needing their approval, you became a mirror, and they hated what they saw. Not because of who you were, but because of what you no longer gave. And that triggered a war inside you, a spiritual conflict that couldn't be solved with logic, because part of you still carried the pattern, the instinct to appease, to smooth things over, to maintain the illusion of peace. You didn't want to lose people. You didn't want to be the villain in their story. But something deeper had awakened. A voice inside whispering, "Peace that costs your truth is just a slower kind of death." So you chose discomfort. You chose misinterpretation. You let people be offended by your wholeness. Because you were done being small, so others could feel tall. That decision changed everything. There's a specific kind of loneliness that visits you after liberation. Not because you're unloved, but because you're no longer manipulable. You become untouchable, and that terrifies those who only knew how to relate to your wounded version. You stopped apologizing for your clarity. You stopped shrinking to fit dynamics that never deserved your energy. And suddenly, you were too much, too clear, too sovereign. But the truth is, you didn't become more. You just stopped being less. And that new presence of yours made everything built on your old self begin to crumble. They didn't know how to handle this new version of you, the one who smiled without explanation, the one who could say no without guilt, the one who didn't need a committee to confirm their choices. You became dangerous, not because you were violent, but because you were free. And people don't know what to do with someone they can't control. They try guilt. They try withdrawal. They try concern. But none of it works. Because your energy is no longer hooked into theirs. You broke the unspoken contract. And now, they're left staring at a soul they can no longer predict or contain. So they tried another strategy. Subtle sabotage. A whisper here. A passive-aggressive comment there. Suggestions that something feels off with your partner. Eyes that narrow when you talk about your happiness. Words cloaked in care but laced with control. "I just want what's best for you," really means, "I want you back in my hands." You began to see the pattern, the old tactics, the way they dressed control as protection. And for the first time, you didn't flinch. You didn't explain. You didn't apologize for choosing alignment. And that silence was louder than any argument you could have had. Then came the withdrawal. They stopped calling, stopped checking in. You noticed the empty space where constant validation used to live. But you didn't chase. You didn't beg. Because deep down, you realized the connection was conditional all along. You were loved. As long as you obeyed. As long as you stayed soft and small and quiet. But the moment you stood tall, they labeled you distant, arrogant, changed. But you didn't change. You returned. Returned to yourself. To a center they couldn't distort. And that return marked the true beginning of your freedom. In the stillness of that loss, something sacred emerged. A clarity you had never felt before. A wholeness that didn't depend on being understood. You realized you weren't losing relationships. You were shedding roles. Roles that were never aligned with your soul. You were never meant to be someone's emotional cushion, someone's guilt sponge, someone's echo. You were meant to be clear, whole, free. And now that you are, they can no longer find their place inside your world. But that's not your failure. That's your rising. It finally became clear. This was never about your soulmate. It was never about the person you chose or the relationship you're building. It was about power, control, familiarity. You were part of a system, a web of emotional expectations that kept certain people feeling safe, important, above you. As long as you needed their opinion, they had identity. As long as you sought their blessing, they had value. So when you stopped needing their approval to love, they felt like they were disappearing. Their relevance depended on your obedience, and when that obedience died, their illusion died with it. That's what's really been killing them. The death of the emotional power they once had over you. You became untethered, no longer reactive to their tone, their silence, their passive guilt. You didn't play the role anymore. You didn't return their energy. And without that energetic exchange, they were left with themselves. No one to manipulate, no one to correct, no one to shrink so they could feel tall. And the truth is, it was never love that tied you together. It was hierarchy. And you finally walked off their stage, you started to see it clearly. The little moments where your sadness had been rewarded with closeness. But your joy had triggered withdrawal. You began to remember how often your peace made others restless. How your truth always needed to be softened, translated, repackaged for their comfort. And how your past self had done it, willingly, because you thought connection required compromise. But now you know, compromise without mutual respect is not love. It's bondage. And every time you dimmed your truth, you were feeding a dynamic that quietly devoured you. There was a time you thought keeping the peace meant keeping people. That if you just explained more, softened more, apologized faster, you could hold it all together. But all that did was reinforce the lie that your wholeness was too much. You played small to earn belonging. You internalized their discomfort as your defect. And that pattern cost you years of power. But now, standing in clarity, you see the cost. You see the games. You see the codependency. And you finally understand that your soul never agreed to that contract. It was imposed. And now, it's broken. You didn't become selfish. You became free. And your freedom revealed the depth of their dependency. They weren't angry because you chose someone. They were angry because you chose yourself. You were supposed to stay unsure, torn, spiritually fragmented, easy to guide, guilt, and gaslight. But the moment you made a choice from a place of groundedness, you became unshakable. And unshakable people can't be used. That's what really changed. Not your relationship status, but your spiritual posture. You rose, and everything built on your compliance began to collapse. They tried to rebuild the system. New narratives, new accusations. You've changed. You're cold now. You're being manipulated. But you didn't flinch, because you finally recognized the voice behind the mask. It wasn't concern. It wasn't protection. It was fear. Fear of irrelevance. Fear of losing access to your energy. Fear of not being needed anymore. And when that fear wasn't fed, it turned to rage. And when rage didn't work, it turned to absence. But by then, you had already made peace with being misunderstood. Because clarity costs connection, and truth costs approval. But your soul was finally worth the price. And so, the collapse became complete. Not with fireworks, but with quiet, with absence, with space, with you realizing that the foundation they built for your identity was made of sand, and the ocean of your truth came to wash it away. You didn't destroy anything. You just stopped pretending. And when the pretending ended, so did their power. They're not angry at your love. They're mourning their grip. But what you're building now is not based on guilt. It's based on God, on alignment, on what actually brings peace, not what only looks peaceful. And that difference is everything. This was never just about choosing someone to love. It was about choosing yourself, your alignment, your clarity, your peace. And in doing so, you disrupted a long line of generational patterns. Patterns that told you to be small, to stay safe. Patterns that convinced you love meant self-abandonment. But you broke it. You said, "No more." And that no wasn't just for the people around you. It was for the cycle itself. A cycle where your worth depended on emotional obedience. A cycle where your happiness was always second to someone else's comfort. That cycle ended the moment you said yes to your truth. The line between self-respect and selfishness was always blurred by those who benefited from your silence. They made you believe that prioritizing your soul was a betrayal. But now you see clearly. The real betrayal was asking your soul to wait. Waiting for them to approve. Waiting for their blessing. Waiting for a green light that was never coming. And the moment you stopped waiting, the moment you stepped, you rewrote the energetic blueprint of your life. That single act of defiance was divine. Because it wasn't rebellion, it was remembrance. You remembered who you are beyond their narrative. What many people call love is actually a system of unspoken agreements. I'll make you feel valuable if you make me feel safe. I'll keep needing you if you keep needing me. But the moment you exit that script, the moment you grow, the contract falls apart. And that collapse feels like death to those who never loved you, only loved the role you played. Your choice to evolve is a spiritual revolution. It breaks more than hearts. It breaks illusions. And it sets you free in a way that no apology, no explanation, no compromise ever could. That's why they're hurting. And that's why you're finally whole. Now, others will feel uncomfortable in your presence, not because of anything you've done wrong, but because of everything you've outgrown. You've stopped explaining your joy. You've stopped performing humility to keep others comfortable. You've stopped bending so others won't break. And that shift, that new frequency, will naturally repel what no longer resonates. But don't take it personally. You're not being rejected. You're being redirected toward people who can actually meet you in your truth, not just tolerate your growth. There's something sacred about not needing to be understood. It's the doorway to a higher love, one that doesn't beg, doesn't chase, doesn't perform. When you stop needing others to agree with your soul's path, you finally start walking it. And you realize, not everyone is meant to follow you there. Some will stay behind, some will watch from a distance, some will talk. But none of that matters when you're rooted in self-honesty, rooted in God, rooted in peace that isn't dependent on performance. That kind of peace can't be stolen, only stepped into. This is when your purpose becomes clearer, not just to heal, not just to be happy, but to stand. Stand for truth in a world that rewards pretending. Stand for clarity in spaces built on confusion. Stand for love that doesn't come with a leash. And as you stand, others will be forced to choose. Honor you or fall away. Either way, you won't shrink again. You won't silence your knowing. Because your presence is not just a gift, it's a disruption. And that's exactly what you were born to be. And then something begins to settle in you. Not pride, not ego, but certainty. A soft, unshakable certainty that you are no longer accessible to manipulation, no longer reachable through guilt, no longer programmable through fear. And with that shift, the atmosphere around you changes. Conversations shift. Relationships rearrange. Your life doesn't get easier, but it gets cleaner, simpler, more sacred. Because now, everything is built on what's true. And that truth, though costly, is your home. Something changes when you no longer need to be understood to feel at peace. You begin to walk with a quiet strength that doesn't demand attention, but commands respect. Not because you raised your voice, but because you no longer lower your energy. You don't chase closure anymore. You don't plead for people to stay. You don't rearrange your integrity to protect someone else's insecurity. And because of that, your steps carry weight. You're not explaining, you're embodying. And those who can't align with that will fall away, not because you pushed them, but because you simply stopped shrinking. The people who were meant to stay, they adjust, they rise, they meet you in your clarity, not with resistance, but with reverence. And the ones who don't, they reveal their true posture. You never had to cut anyone off. You just had to stop bending. The rest took care of itself, because when you operate from truth, only truth remains. The rest dissolves. And though it hurts to lose people you once loved, it hurts more to lose yourself trying to keep them. That lesson, it was the hardest one. But now, it's the anchor of your strength. You're no longer building relationships based on loyalty to your old wounds. You've returned to your center, the place where decisions aren't made out of guilt, fear, or need, but from alignment. You can hear your own intuition again. You trust your discernment. You honor your energy. That's not arrogance. It's spiritual hygiene. You're not here to carry the weight of other people's disappointment anymore. You're here to live clean. And living clean sometimes means walking alone, at least for a while. But you no longer dread that silence. You welcome it. Because in that silence, your soul can breathe again. And in that breath, you hear God. This journey brought you back to what matters: the relationship you have with yourself, the mirror you face at the end of every day. You used to look into that mirror and see fragments. Now, you see someone whole, someone you fought to become, someone who paid a price for clarity, and would do it again. Because this peace isn't something you stumbled into. It's something you reclaimed. No one gave it to you. You earned it. Through tears, through boundaries, through silence, through truth. And now that you have it, nothing less will ever satisfy you again. This was never about rebellion. It was about remembering. Remembering that your soul was never meant to be a currency for approval. That your love is not a liability to be managed, but a light to be honored. If this message resonated with something sacred within you, write in the comments, "I choose the truth, even if it costs me approval." This shows the universe how strong you are on the divine path. Now I have a special request. Like the video and subscribe to the channel, so you don't miss any new content, and so that YouTube can spread these messages to others who need it. So, want to thank everyone who supports us through Buy Me a Coffee. Your support helps us improve our videos every day and always offer the best content. If you want to support us, the link is in the first pinned comment. If you want to delve even deeper into the secrets that make you someone so special, be sure to check out the video indicated on the screen or our Secrets of the Chosen playlist. Each episode was created to guide you even deeper into your essence. Thank you for following me this far. Keep going, and may God bless you.